Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about one of the most important parts of data science, or at least one of the parts that I think is talked about less often than it should be. So the question really, the core part of data science is taking questions and using math and code and other tools to help leverage data to answer those questions. Often that'll take the form of taking all the data and condensing it down into a metric or a measure, right? And one of the disconnects that happens, especially with beginning data scientists, is trying to make sure that the question you have and the metric you have are actually well aligned. In other words, that you're answering the right question. So we're going to get into that a little bit. As an example to get us started, one thing that people commonly talk about is unemployment rate, right? So you've probably heard that reported about before. And here is two different metrics of the unemployment rate. So this is done with math. They're both correct in a sense, but they measure different things. So one of them is what the official unemployment rate for men is, and this is men 25 to 54. And the other is that exact same population, and it's the percentage of men that are not working. And you might say, hey, wait a minute. What's the difference between unemployment and not working? And that's where these definitions, these metrics, these measures really get complicated. So the official unemployment rate in the U.S. Only includes people who are actively looking for work. So people who are not looking for work anymore because they're retired or disabled or going to school may not count as unemployed. It actually is even more complicated than that. The official unemployment rate, there are 6 or so variants of them, and some of them include seasonal workers, other ones don't. How they count part-time varies, all sorts of things like that. So it's not straightforward to look at the world and come up with a measure of the thing you want, right? One of these plots looks like, from the 60s to the middle of the 2010s, that the labor force participation rate, the percentage of men who are not working, has really grown, but the unemployment rate looks pretty similar to what it looked like in the past. And depending on the story you want to tell, one of these may be more accurate or less accurate. So that's one way that talking about numbers is complicated. Here's another one, which is when you're presenting the data, it can be really confusing if it's not done very carefully. So here we're looking at two plots. They're stacked bar plots. And this is actually from a survey that's called the National Assessment of Adult Literacy. And so they look at a number of things like reading comprehension among adults and things like that. But they also look at if people can understand various plots and charts. And we look at how that varies over time to evaluate our educational system and things. So what I want you to do is take a minute and think about, so we're just going to look at the male chart here, the male educational attainment. We want to look at 2005, and we want to find the percentage that have 6 or more years of schooling, more than 6 years of schooling in 2005. So obviously you can sort of go through this exercise. I want you to think it through and pick a number. It actually turns out is kind of difficult. So first off, we zoom in on the male chart. The plot we're interested in is this more than 6 years of schooling, this yellow section. But what we need to recognize is that because this is a stacked bar chart, we actually want to pick the size of the yellow area, not the top bar or the bottom bar, but the size of that bar, right? Because that's the percentage who have more than 6 years of schooling. So this is very confusing. And if you got it wrong, don't feel bad. It is a correct plot, but doing the analysis right is tricky. And as a data scientist, your job is to tell people answers where that they can make actions based on. So in this case, the majority of people misunderstand this plot. When we do this survey, the National Assessment of Adult Literacy, there are 6 options here. So you would hope that some percentage of people get it right. It turns out it's less than 10%. So people do worse than random guessing on reading this plot. And what I'm going to say, and this is a little strong, is that when you mislead people that way as a data scientist, it's equivalent to lying to them. That you've misled them, even if it's unintentional, you've caused them to make a decision based on bad information. So even though your plot's not wrong, it's still wrong. So what can you do about this? Well, one thing you can do is make different plots. So there were a number of problems with this plot. Just zooming in on the male one thing you'll notice is the years are not even. So you get a 10-year gap, then a 20-year gap, back to 10, then a 5-year gap. Smoothing that out helps you see trends more clearly, right? It seems much less bouncy. Another thing that helps possibly is just using a table, right? Here you can immediately go through and say 2005, more than 6, 41%, and get the correct answer. In fact, there's a number of other ways to present data, and that's a whole topic that there are classes and even majors on. So there's a data visualization in society, and it's a super interesting topic. Okay, there are other ways that reasoning about numbers can be a little bit confusing. So here we're looking at a Twitter advertising campaign. And in this Twitter advertising campaign, they're considering how successful this particular ad is, and they're trying to reach an audience that has a history of heart disease. So the ad campaign says, every man in my family has heart disease, I want to be the last. And then you can see here how many times the ad was shown, so that's impressions, how many times it was clicked on, and what the click rate is. And so what you see is that the click rate is actually lower for people who have heart disease, right? Which is sort of the opposite of what you're expecting, right? Or what you were hoping for with this thing. But it's actually a little bit hard to say what's going on. So there's a couple of factors that make it more difficult. One of the things is it might not be a meaningful difference. And what I mean by that is a statistically significant difference. So with these kind of numbers, it probably is, but those click rates are very low. And sometimes when you're dealing with very small numbers, just small counts can randomly change things, and things can look like they're very different when in fact it's just luck. More importantly, you got to think about how people click on ads. So if it was true that people with heart disease clicked on ads way less often in general, then maybe this isn't a problem. Maybe you are reaching those people and getting them to disproportionately click on ads. So for example, you could imagine all sorts of confounding things in here where if most people over 65 have heart disease, but most people over 65 never click on ads, then you could end up in a situation where this is actually a really good campaign, even though the click rate of those with heart disease is lower. So really getting in and reasoning about these in careful ways and establishing causality is really tricky. Okay. So this is a number of different ways. So far we've talked about ways to reason about numbers, so making plots, thinking carefully about the numbers, all these kind of things. What I want to say is that in general, when you are getting ready in a company or a presentation or whatever to do data science, what you're really doing is you're using data and math and code to help people think about the world. And you're going to be talking about numbers maybe to a crowd that isn't totally ready to hear them, isn't well educated in that space. And so you need to meet people where they're at. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. One thing is you can help create a data-driven culture. So you can try to get people to reason more carefully about things with data instead of just trusting their instincts or whatever. There are a whole lot of pieces to that. One is training the audience, so increasing their data literacy. Another one is understanding the decision-making process and making sure that you're contributing meaningfully to it. So if you, for example, report metrics that don't actually matter, you're not going to affect anything. You're not going to help people make decisions. On the data side of data-driven culture, you also need to make sure that what you're talking about is a real effect, so you're not being fooled by randomness. But you also need to be very careful about trust. So it is easy as a data scientist to come to a wrong conclusion, either because your analysis was wrong, the data was noisy, you make a mistake, and to burn a lot of trust. And it's hard to recover once you've given someone bad advice. So often it's worth spending the time to be really sure that you understand what's going on. So, broadly, my advice to you as a data scientist is to answer questions one at a time. So to get really crisp on that question, to run a number of experiments. So, for example, if you think you can make something better by making a certain change, sometimes it makes sense to go in there and actually try to make it worse by making the opposite change and see if you can affect things, see if you can really understand what's going on. You need to present your data, present initial findings, get feedback as you go, and iterate. Keeping things secret for a long time is absolutely not helpful. You want to be out there and say, this is preliminary, this is a first draft. So like we've talked about, there are a lot of ways to talk about numbers. This is 3 books that I think do a good job of it. Several of them are kind of dated now, but Numeracy is a book about mistakes people make when reasoning about numbers. There are a number of books like this that have come out recently, but I really like this one because it talks a lot about the consequences of misunderstanding things like rates and baselines and how to reason about the world. The Visual Display of Quantitative Information is a book about how to make plots and how to make them informative and beautiful. There's a lot of information about that on the internet. And then this book, Data Fluency, is really about how to communicate and create organizations and think about data-driven decision-making in groups, specifically in companies. So there are a lot of other good books on this topic, and it's worth studying and thinking carefully about, especially if you want to be on the side of data science where you are helping people make decisions. So now I want to do an exercise. So I said earlier that one of the key topics of data science is to go from a question to a metric. So we're going to imagine a scenario. I'm going to talk it through. And then you're actually going to pause the video and take a little bit of time and think about a solution to this. So here's a scenario. You're a data scientist, and you're at a company that just sells stuff. And as part of that, they have an email marketing program where they send bulk emails to people. So the marketing department comes to you as the data scientist and says, hey, we want a metric that tells us when user engagement is down. So they want some system that will watch the emails going out, and when people stop engaging with the emails as much, it lets them know. So you need to design that metric. All right. For the purpose today, assume you have access to a real-time flow of events. So every time something happens in the world, you get sent that little piece of data, and you want to design that metric. So here's a typical flow. This is called a Sankey chart. And at the beginning, you have 100 emails being sent, so 100%. some percentage of those emails bounce, and that bounces are immediately removed from the list. Of the ones that are actually sent, 95% are delivered, right? So the ones that aren't bounced. Some percentage of those get opened, some are clicked, and some people actually purchase an item. Other people open the email, but they either unsubscribe or report the email spam, so they get removed from the list. So what I want you to do is to think through, with this particular example, how you might design a metric. And you could write it down in pseudocode or actual code. You could draw a flow chart. You could just write a paragraph. But maybe take a couple of minutes and think carefully about this problem and go ahead. So go ahead and pause it now. All right, welcome back. So hopefully you did this. I'm actually going to show you my result, and it's bad. And I'll talk about why it's bad a little bit. So here's my result. I had this hourly job. This is a real thing I did, by the way. So I have this hourly job, and I say I'm going to count up all the emails. So we're, basically everything where the action is sent and where something happened within the last day. So today -1, right? So I count all those events. I also count all the clicking events. So the times people actually click on the link in the email. Then I can come up with a click rate, right? I have some threshold. That threshold is maybe from history or knowledge or whatever. And if the click rate is, I guess this is probably backwards. If the click rate is below the threshold, that means engagement is down, and I would send some alert. This seems sensible. Maybe you came up with a solution like this. This was a debacle, and it's terrible for a number of reasons, some of which are pretty obvious in retrospect, but weren't to me at the time, and some are kind of subtle. So let's go into all the things that are wrong with this. So one of them is that I send an alert when the metric is below the threshold, so the click rate in this case. But one thing that'll happen is sometimes you'll end up with a scenario where you're right at a threshold. And so you're like, oh, things are good, things are bad, things are good. And so if you send an alert every time you're below, if you send an alert every time you're below, you send it all the time. But if you just send it sort of when you're rattling around like that, it's really not ideal. So you can... Every time you cross threshold, you send another alert, you overload the person. It's terrible. A more subtle thing is that the clicks are delayed. So if you think about a bulk email program, you send an email out to thousands of people, and the clicks take time to roll in, right? People don't open the email immediately. Sometimes they won't open it until the next day, right? And so if you're just looking in a 24-hour period, when you first send the emails, the click rate looks terrible because they haven't shown up yet. So you need to think carefully about how to do that, and maybe wait or have a model that predicts how many clicks will finally show up or something like that, right? So this one's really tricky. Another issue is this idea of unique versus total clicks. So if you send an email out to a bunch of people, it's possible that some of those people will click more than one time. And you may not actually be interested in those people who click multiple times. So you may want to see unique clicks, which is, in plain English, instead of saying how many clicks happened divided by how many emails were sent, what you really want to know is how many people clicked divided by how many emails were sent, right? So people clicked is unique clicks. It's clicks per person. This is especially bad when you have automated systems. So at one point, there was a bug in a mail app back when I was working in this space that would click all the links thousands of times. It was supposed to be a link checker to make sure they were safe or something, but basically it went through and clicked them thousands of times. And so the click rates looked great, but if you went and looked at unique clicks, which is what you actually care about, they were terrible. So in fact, my numerator was wrong on the previous one. The denominator was also wrong. So it turns out in email marketing land, the standard measure of engagement is not clicks divided by sends. It's clicks divided by opens. And you might think that's kind of weird, because really what you're interested in is sales, right? Or if you're trying to sell something. So what's going on? Well, the number of people who open is really a function of technology, email delivery, things end up in a certain spam box, all that kind of stuff. But for the people who are doing the marketing, they really only care once you've looked at the email if you're interested in the thing in it. That's the measure of if they're doing a good job. So the population that matters to them is people who looked at the email, and then later they want to say, did they end up buying something? The problem is buying stuff is rare, right? It's only a couple of %. So opens are a good proxy measurement for that because they're much more robust and they happen faster. So the unique clicks per open are a better measure. And then finally, I did a 24-hour rolling window. That may not be appropriate. It could be people don't care about things that happened yesterday, and it could be that's too fast. It could be that averaging over a longer period of time is better. So there's a lot of pieces that can go wrong with this. There were actually a bunch more also. I have a Medium article where I wrote about all the mistakes I made on this, and there were many. So it's a really subtle problem. And I think in general, when you get into that, you'll find that most measures, the unemployment rate, the percentage of people that have more than 6 years of education, all these different things, these measures are not straightforward. When you start doing math, there's a lot of choices that you have to make about the best way to do analysis, and there's sort of best practices there. So the thing first to keep in mind is that you are handing this analysis to people, and they're going to make decisions based on it. So your job is to have the understanding that's in that consumer's head, that person who is receiving the analysis from you, be as close to reality as possible, right? So the ways you can do that is that, first off, don't ship bad things. So if you know there's a problem, hit the big red button. Don't put it out in the world. It's a mistake. When you do make a mistake, fix it quickly and own it. Reach out to people and say, hey, there was an error in this. I think we've got it now, but really do a good job. Also check in with people to make sure they actually get what's going on, right? Sometimes people will misunderstand, or you will misunderstand, right? I had the wrong metric, but when I said, hey, this is the click rate, people assumed that was click to open instead of click to send. So you really need to sit down with people and make sure that you're understanding each other, that you're sharing a common vocabulary. But the most important part is to get the question really crisp, really sharp. So you're going to be doing this thing a lot, and what you want to do is somebody will ask a question in English. So they might say, hey, what's going to happen with my stock? And what you need to do is you need to translate that into math. So you need to take that and think about what that would look like in code. So when you do that, when they say what's going to happen, what they mean is, okay, what's going to happen? Do they mean an action? Do they mean a price? Do they mean how it will change? What's the time window, right? Keep getting more and more precise. And what you'll do is you will reformulate the question. So somebody will say, hey, what's going to happen with my stock? And you will come back and say, hey, I built a thing that will estimate what the sale price will be at the close of the market 1 week from today, right? So you actually answer a different question than they asked. So often during that process, you either make things broader or sometimes you make things more narrow, and you really get very precise. So So let's tie this back to the analysis we're doing in class. So we're talking about San Diego Police Department data, and we're looking at cars that are getting pulled over and traffic stops and things like that. You might start with a very general question, right? So for example, what time are cars usually being pulled over? And as you dig into that, you realize that question is not precise. So when you say usually, do you mean the percentage of cars on the road, or do you mean total numbers, right? Because people drive less in the middle of the night. So it could be that you're more likely to get pulled over in the middle of the night, but that there are actually less total numbers of people being pulled over. Do you care about like weekday versus weekend? Do you want to split that? Are those two different things? When you say pulled over, if for example the police are responding to an accident, and so the car's already stopped when they arrive, does that count? So are you interested in all what are called traffic stops, or are you only interested in the actual pulling over, right? And then when you say what time, is that hour windows? Is that day versus night? Is it down to the minute, right? There's so much question in there, and what you have to do is you really have to understand what is being asked, and then do your best job to answer that thing. I really feel like this is the hardest part of data science, is getting a really crisp question, and it's something we don't think enough about. So my challenge to you when you're doing any data science question is to be able to write down exactly, crisply, what question it is you're trying to answer. So what the context is, what's the audience is, what filters are going to be there, what windowing, what math. And eventually you'll be able to say, I want to be able to do this thing with this technique, with this area, and be really precise and crisp about it. All right, that's it for today. Thank you.